Hello. Thank you very much. So, actually, exactly about 14 years ago, I woke up one morning and my hands and feet were numb. They, when you sleep on your hand and then you have to like wake up and it takes like 30 seconds until that tingling feeling goes away. I had that in all four of my limbs and it wouldn't go away. So I thought I was just a little bit sick. I didn't know what was going on. And I was at this time studying at a university, and I was talking to my mom on the phone, who happens to specialize in research of infectious diseases. And I told her that I feel weird. I don't know, I can't shake that tingling feeling. As I looked down on my legs, I saw like a brownish dot or discoloration on my shins. And I told her that, and she told me to go to the hospital immediately. And so I went to the doctor, but by the time I got to the doctor, I could barely walk. And when I got in and sat down, that was the last time I was on my feet for a very, very long time. The doctor didn't know what was going on, but could tell that I was getting worse and worse. So immediately called an ambulance. They took me into a hospital. At that point, I was in and out. I didn't really know what was going on. I couldn't really stay conscious for long or large amounts of times. And my last memory is that a young doctor is standing above me, telling me that they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's wrong with me. They just know that my organs are all shutting down, so they need to put me in a coma, and they need to figure out what's happening. And so that's what they did. And as they put me in a coma, I immediately started hallucinating things. Now, the timeline of what happens when someone goes into a coma is weird. I don't know when those things actually happen, when those hallucinations actually happen. It was most likely when I was actually starting to wake up a little over a week later from the coma they put me in, and my brain was flooded with dopamine and I guess everything that the brain floods itself with in these situations. And as I was waking up and kind of took about 24 hours for me to understand that I was in a hospital, I was on a bed, and what the doctors were telling me was that I had a meningitis infection. They were able to catch it just in the right time so they could save my life, but the damage is extensive. They don't know what it is yet. And they don't know if I'll survive, but for now they managed to kill the bacteria. I was dead for about 5 to 10 minutes during that time. So they don't know what's up. They're happy that I can see and I can hear, because they didn't know if that was going to be an issue. And hopefully, if as I get my consciousness back and I can think more clearly, hopefully I'll be fundamentally fine in my head. The problem particularly wasn't in my head. It was on all the body parts that as I looked down saw were dried up and dead, basically. My fingers were black. It's called tissue necrosis that happened after a sepsis occurred during the meningitis infection. And what that effectively meant was that the dead blood cells, the clotting of the blood cells happened inside the veins, and all the clotting material that you would get like on a scab, they just ended up going into the capillaries in my arms and in my legs, and there was no oxygen that went to the tissues there, and the tissues dried out and died away. So over the course of the next 2 months, the doctors methodically went and started cutting off parts of my body to see how far they had to go, because you couldn't tell what the extent of the damage was. They did all kinds of CT scans and whatever they could to find out how far they need to start or go with the amputations. But as they said, the best way to find out is to cut and see. So they're just going to have to go in and find out, where they don't know what they're going to take me out with. So every time they took me in for a surgery, I had to sign paper. I couldn't move. So they had to sign papers with my mouth saying that I'm okay with them having to cut off my whole arm if that's what they find during the surgery. It was not a fun time. But luckily for me, as I said, my mother was in the field of infectious diseases. My father was also in the medical field, so the doctors accepted his opinions on many cases, and he managed to stop them from cutting off a bunch of stuff that they, as it turned out, didn't have to cut off. So I was very lucky that I had them there to looking out for me while I was in and out of different surgeries. But the process took about 2.5 months, and it ended with me losing my left arm above my elbow, my right hand. They had to lock my wrist so I can't move that. I lost some mobility in my arm, extensive skin tissue damage, so they had to take off about 40% of my skin. The other parts of my skin they took off to put over where they had to take it off. So there was about a month and a half where I had no healed skin on my entire body, and they just had to bandage that and take off the bandages every 2 days, not to avoid getting an infection, because they told me if I get another infection, I'm definitely dead. So they can't risk it. So they're just going to have to do that. Now that's like getting flayed every 2 days. It's very bad because there's only muscle there, so the stuff kind of sticks into the muscles, and they have to just rip it out. Anyway, sorry about that. It's a rough process, but it's part of what happened, and I had to go through that process. And during that entire process, people I knew, friends of the family, friends of mine, parents of my friends, a lot of them were in the medical field, were in the technological field, scientists, researchers, came in and said, just you have to hold on, you have to keep like holding on and do this whole thing, because it's going to be fine. Because you're gonna keep as much as you need. There's going to be prosthetic devices out there. They're amazing. Showing like 1-minute videos off of Facebook or whatever social media existed in that time. Like, look, someone can control this prosthesis with their thoughts and stuff like that. And that kind of kept me going, thinking, okay, well, if I pull through the hard part, then there's a pathway to getting basically back to where I was, which is an outrageous thought. But of course, when I was pumped up on morphine and all kinds of fun stuff, so I was pretty delirious. And as soon as I stopped getting all that morphine and started to come back into reality and kind of come back into realizing and understanding what my situation actually is, well, things started to get a little more grim. And it took about 1 year after all the amputations, after everything that I went through, to get my first prosthetic device. And I thought I just need to get to that point, get that prosthesis, and I'll be fine, because I'm just going to have an arm like I did before. Everything's going to be great. And I got that first prosthesis, and it was terrible. It was just the worst experience of my life. And they tried to put together a really good prosthesis based on what's available in the world and in the market, but it was just like, functionally speaking, it was terrible. It was uncomfortable. Everything was wrong with it. It had nothing to do with all the videos and all the promotional material that I saw online. And at that time, before the meningitis infection, I was studying engineering. I was studying to be a network engineer, so working on mobile networks. 5G wasn't out at that time, so we were learning about 5G and how those systems work. And after the amputation, after I got my first prosthesis, I said, I have to do something about it. This is ridiculous that we have iPhones, and you can go into the store and buy an iPhone and set it up however you want. And then when it comes to people trying to replace a limb, which is supposed to be part of my body, what I get is something that someone put together and said, okay, now try to use it. Go home and try to use it. Yeah, well, how can I adjust it to like work best for me? Oh, you can't adjust anything. This is just how it is. It's a hook, it can open and close, or it's a hand and it can open and close. Maybe you can rotate your wrist like I can with this in one direction and the other, and then you can open the hand and then you can close the hand. And at that time, my elbow was body powered, so I had cables hooked on my body so that I can get the elbow to move. My current prosthesis has an elbow that is controllable, but the reason there wasn't a point of getting an elbow like that is because I couldn't generate control signals to actually make the hand do the things that I wanted to do. So I felt that was outrageous, that I, as a user, had no ownership over the system, that I can't adjust it to make it better for me, and that in general the technology is so far removed from what's presented on the internet and what's shown to people that this is the best I can get. So I focused in very heavily on robotics and machine learning to try and figure out, okay, what's going on? Where's the disconnect in this whole process? Is it the robotics? Is it the control systems? Something's definitely missing. So I started focusing my studies on that, and after finishing my bachelor's, I applied for a Fulbright scholarship. I got that, and I went to Johns Hopkins, where there's a famous lab that works very specifically on control systems for upper limb prosthetic devices. And I said, okay, if anywhere, that's where I'm going to find out how these things work and how they should work and why they're not working, and why I can't have a prosthesis that's actually practical and useful. During this time, I got better at doing everything without a prosthesis. So everything I do in general in life, I do without a prosthesis because I was so upset, I was so angry at the device that I didn't want to wear it. And I was like, I can do everything better than with this device, which I, to this day, actually can. If I work, we heard a lot about low code and no code. I do high code. I do a lot of coding. I didn't put my arm up when the question was asked who's a software developer, but I am a software developer, and I code without a prosthesis, just with one hand, and it's still way more effective than using a prosthetic device. So when I got to Johns Hopkins and I started looking into, okay, what are the systems that are generally used to control a prosthetic device? The system that I received, and that is the generally used system, basically to this day, is something called direct control. And what that uses is EMG, which is electromyography. Those are the electrical signals generated by your muscles. So if you look at my arm, but you can look at your own as well, if you close your hand into a fist, you'll see that there's going to be muscles on your lower arm that flex. When those muscles flex, they flex because the brain sends a signal through the nervous system, sends that signal to what are called motor units that are attached to the muscle. And when those motor units get that electrical signal, they kind of amplify it through the entire muscle, and because of that, the muscle contracts. So when the muscle contracts, it works like the same way an amplifier works for a guitar. You play the guitar, an electrical guitar, and you don't have an amplifier attached to it, you're creating the signal that's going to make the sound that's going to create, Stairway to Heaven. But if I'm standing here and just playing on an electrical guitar, no one's going to enjoy that much. Not that I can, but I mean, maybe one day. But if I attach it to an amplifier, it's going to take those signals and it's going to run it through the magnetic coils, basically, to push it out and make it very, very loud. And that's exactly what muscles do. They're acting as amplifiers to the electrical signal that's sent by the brain. And we can read those electrical signals the same way we can read EKG. I don't know if I'm sure most of you have seen EKG signals in at least movies or in a hospital, where you have that beep, 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 exactly the same mechanism. It's a bit of a different frequency, but it's the exact same idea and the exact same mechanism for reading electrical signals from the muscle. So what you get is an electrode on one muscle and another electrode on another muscle that's opposed to that one. So if I think about my upper arm, those are very famous oppositional muscles, so-called antagonist muscles. One is the biceps, the other is the triceps. With the biceps, you flex. With the triceps, you extend. And the two of those generally do not fire at the same time under natural conditions because you're either flexing or you're extending. You're not going to do those simultaneously. So what you can get out of that are two very nice, very easy to handle and read signals of, oh, I flexed my biceps, a big, like a line goes up, or I flex my triceps, another line goes up, but they don't go up at the same time. And so if I do one or the other, I'll get the hand to open or I'll get the hand to close. And if I learn to do them at the same time, I can use that as a switch. And if I do them simultaneously, after a lot of practice, I can use one to rotate the wrist and I can use the other to rotate the wrist in the other direction. So that's basically the control systems for prosthetic devices that are electrically controlled. The general population has access to that. You can open, close, and you can switch so that you can open the wrist or close the wrist, or rotate the wrist in one direction or the other. So it's not particularly sophisticated compared to what we can do with our hands. And so the next step is where I went to Hopkins. The focus there was using machine learning to basically take more signals in and then try to figure out if there's any control we can generate out of those signals. So if I have 8 electrodes around my arm, not just 2, then what I'll have is a bunch of different EMG sensors picking up a bunch of different signals at the same time. So a lot of 8 different squiggly lines. And if I open and close my hand the way I would have done it originally, I can still feel my phantom limb. I can still try and do the movement with the hand that was cut off. Nothing's going to happen because I don't have the hand anymore, but I can still try and do it, and the signals are still going to go somewhere. And they're going to terminate too, but if I imagine opening the fingers that I lost, you can see that my arm, like the muscles flex in my arm. And if I close, they also flex, but they look a little different. Open, close, open, close. So even with your eyes, you can tell that different muscles are activating in different patterns. And the word pattern is critical because what we try to use to discriminate and teach the system is pattern recognition. And pattern recognition works on the idea that if I show an algorithm, show a machine learning algorithm what my open looks like, what my close looks like, what my rotations look like, then that system will try, and based on that information, it will try to decode what I'm doing in real time.
Pattern is the same for all of us, or we have a different?
No, everyone different. Well, it depends. It's very different for people who have lost limbs because I don't have the same musculature. I don't have there's a lot of reorganization that happens. There's some generalizability in healthy population, but even that is very heavily in the research phase because the information is so the difference between these patterns is relatively low. So things like the pigmentation of the skin have significant impact in the quality of the EMG signal, for instance. And that's enough noise and noise differentiation to make the problem not generalizable, at least with the tools that we have right now. It probably will be, but not yet. So what we have is a bunch of these lines and a system that can learn what generally my movements look like, and then it can try and predict what I'm trying to do in any given moment, and that's the system I have right now. So if I think about opening my hand and think about closing my hand, it'll open and close the hand. If I think about rotating my wrist in one direction or rotating my wrist in the other direction, then that's what the hand will do. And I'm not thinking about what muscles I need to flex. I'm actually thinking about doing that movement with the arm that I lost and with the hand that I don't have anymore. So it's a more intuitive way of getting these controls. Now, it's still very limited, but in itself, it allows for more degrees of freedom for users and individuals who need these systems or use these systems. Now, a big problem with this was that people didn't understand how it worked. And if people don't understand how it worked, it's not enough to say, you don't need to worry about it. just try doing, the movements that you would do, and it's going to be fine. The algorithm will figure it out. That was the idea, that we can leave all that to the algorithm, and we can leave all that to the back-end math, and then people will be it'll fill in the blanks for what the people don't understand. And what we found was that that's not true. People need to understand what they're doing, because if it goes wrong while they're using it, which it always does, they won't know why. They won't know how to adjust to it in real time. And that's where my decades of animosity towards the general principle of, here's a system, you don't need to understand how it works, just use it, it'll be fine. That mentality for me as a user and as an engineer too was always incredibly infuriating, because the people need to be involved in the system. They need to know how it works. They need to understand how it works to get the most functionality out of it. So a lot of my research was focused on, and if we can share the screen, hopefully it'll, yes, the Bluetooth is still connected, which I'm very happy about. Most of my research was focused on how can we take the machine learning system, create an algorithm that works as a classifier, so fulfills the task of being able to classify and predict what I'm trying to do with my electrical signals, and create a control signal out of that, but also make it so that we can present it to users in a way that they'll understand what's going on under the hood. And so what you see here is the end result of a machine learning algorithm. If an AI system, and this is a relatively low-level AI system, because it has to work on an embedded system, and it has to consume relatively low amounts of power, but it's still a machine learning system. If you want to imagine what a system like that sees, if we're thinking about it as some sort of intelligence, then it has a world that it lives in, and it has a reality that it lives in. This is the reality that it lives in. This is everything that it knows. This is all the information that's available to it. And if it was looking around in its own world, this is what it would see. And these are clouds of data. And and in the middle there's a little white X that's moving around. That's my real-time signals. So that's what the real-time information from my arm that gets projected into this 3D visualization. And what it looks at is basically, okay, what is this closest to? What does this look like the most? And if I do a hand open and my little X kind of goes towards that open cluster, it'll say, okay, this is what it looks like the most. This person's trying to open his hand. And if I go back to close, then it'll close my hand. If I try to rotate my wrist, it'll see that, okay, this is what it's closest to. They're trying to rotate the wrist. And if I try to rotate in the other direction, it's going to be able to do that same thing. So with this visualization, we're not only showing, okay, this is what the machine learning algorithm is thinking, and how it's processing your information and the information you taught it, but what we're also showing them is where it's not doing anything. Like if I'm able to extend and bend and rotate and open and close, if I have a hand that has fingers and it can move those fingers in different ways, are there free spaces in the mind of the machine learning algorithm that I can basically populate with new movements? So if I try to do let's say a finger point. Okay, so my finger point is somewhere between opening and closing my hand. The red dot is in between that cloud of close and in between that cloud of open, and it's trying to decide, I wonder which one that is right now. It can't really tell because it's moving in between the two. But there's a reason for that, because if you point your finger, well, part of your hand is open and part of it is closed. So the way that it's thinking about how I'm doing the movements is inherently correct, because it's moved, the new position, the new action that I'm doing actually falls between the two actions that it knows. And what I can do now is teach it this new action. And it'll put a data cloud in between the two movements and know, okay, if I'm opening, I understand that. If I'm closing, I understand that. Now if I'm doing something in between the two, okay, well now I understand that too as a new movement. Now the reason I brought this and wanted to show this is because the ability to show and present information, especially complex information that generally we we have terms for and talk about, like AI and machine learning, being able to show that to people in a way that they understand will allow them to use it much more efficiently. People that come in and use this system, which was in development for about 10 years, well, 7, 8 years, and it's going to be on market next year. And we've been working with amputees to test it for the past 2 years. People come in and are able to, within 5-10 minutes, add 3-4 new movements to their already existing set of movements that they can do. And they go away thinking, this is like, they didn't think they could do it, because they didn't understand what the system was trying to achieve. But when they understood it, they were able to coexist, co-adapt with that system, and create a much better, much more functionally efficient control and prosthesis for themselves. So, thank you very much. Thank you for. Thank you.
Wait, what's next?
What's next?
Yeah. What's so easy?
Okay, I'll give you what's next. It's I just know you had a very long day. I didn't want to. I didn't want to hold you here for too long. What's next is difficult, because a lot of what we're doing is based off of technology based off of knowledge that's existed for, some of it for 100 years, some of it for 50, 60 years. None of it is newer than 30, 40 years. This is just where we've gotten with modern computational capabilities and embedded systems and reducing consumption of these systems to be able to get things like this onto prosthetic devices. What we're missing are a few key scientific breakthroughs. So right now what I showed is, if I'm thinking about opening the hand, it'll open. As long as I'm thinking about it, it's going to try to open it. But if I stop doing it and go back to what's clustered there as rest, it's going to stay where it is. Now that's not how everyone else's hand here works. When you pick up a bottle of water, you're holding on to that bottle. Like you're not thinking, oh, I already grabbed it, I can not like hold on to it anymore. It's going to fall out of your hands. So the way that we biologically work, and the way that we've been able to process the information that we have and kind of build these systems into our bodies, and how much actual interaction we can achieve with brain-machine interfaces, whether they're above skin or built into the brain, is very, very far away from being a naturalistic thing. We're about 30, 50 years away from something like a prosthetic arm that can do similar things as a biological arm, because there's two analogies I'll bring up, and I'll stop after that. One is, in terms of where this technology, and not just prosthetics, but understanding how the brain works and how the brain interacts with the body, we are about where the first flight over the La Manche Channel. So, and the question, and everyone's expecting, like 747s and that level of technology. And when they ask people, oh, what do you think should be in the next prosthesis, when they ask users, they're saying things like you would say, well, I'd like steak on my next flight. That would be great. But we're not there. We're just trying to keep this thing in the air for long enough so that you don't crash into the ocean. We're not thinking about in-flight meals yet. That's not where we are. So in terms of where the technology is in that perspective, I think is very important, because the indications that what come towards us on the internet of where all this is headed and where it is, and Neuralink and stuff like that, is extremely disproportionate or unrealistic compared to where we actually are. And the other analogy, well, this is not an analogy, this is just fact, but it's a very interesting fact, is the peripheral nervous system carries all the information from the brain to the body. It carries the sensory information, carries the motor control information. The information that's going down, the motor control information, so that what allows you to move your body and do stuff, that is 10% of the information that travels on the peripheral nerves. The other 90% is all sensory feedback going up. we are about 20% into figuring out how the 10% works. We're basically nowhere in figuring out how the 90% going back up works. That's how far we are from these systems being very good, but that's the reality of it. It's a very, very long process. These are decades-long processes of figuring out. We're literally trying to understand how the brain processes information from the world in complex ways. And one last analogy that I'll give, or kind of an example I'll give. Boston Dynamics, everyone knows that company, right? They have the robot with the 2 legs that can now jump and do all kinds of interesting stuff, right? So getting something to stand on 2 legs is a very difficult mathematical problem. It's called it's a nonlinear control problem, and it's an inverse kinematic calculation on multiple joints. It's incredibly difficult and power consuming. That machine that has batteries and motors and everything, basically like 80% of the computational power that they put in that is focused on keeping it on 2 legs and making it able to walk and jump and do stuff. And they're doing amazing things, don't get me wrong. It's really, really cool. But when we think about, oh my God, our phones and our supercomputers, they can calculate so much faster than us, we need to be worried because they're doing better than us. Our brain basically spends 0 energy doing those calculations. It is so incredibly efficient at allowing us to move and keep upright that there's barely any energy cost to that. Figuring out how our brain does that is essential to robotics, so that we can figure out how the brain does that calculation so fast and so energy efficiently. Something that has baffled engineers and physicists for decades, trying to optimize the most minute thing to get it a little bit better and make it stand a little bit more firm. And our brain just on a baseline level does that incredibly efficiently. And we have no idea how it does it. Absolutely 0 idea how it does it. If we figured it out, it would change robotics just completely, forever. So that's the level of how far away we are from understanding our brain and how important it is, and how actually far away technology is from catching up to us. Because it's good, like AI is good at a lot of things, but the way that humanity is set up and how individual humans function and how the brain functions is so far beyond the capabilities of any machine that we've created so far, that we need to calm down with the ideas of this stuff is taking over us. We're in pretty good shape for a pretty long time. We don't need to worry about it in that sense. What we need to worry about is figuring out how we work so that we can simulate it better, so that maybe 30 to 50 years from now, we'll have prosthetic devices that actually kind of can do what the original thing did.